I nā mana, I nā reo, I nā karangaranga hu o nā hau e whā. E tū ake nei tō tātou whare whakahirahira. Ko rangi nui e tū ake nei hei tuanui. Ko papa tuanuku he takoto nei he whāriki. Ko te reo me nā tikanga he tāhuhu. Ko te iwi hei pau toko manoa. E tui te whare. Hei whakairi o tātou wāwata. O tātou kumanako, o tātou moimoi. Nō reira kōtau I te whānau, haere mai, take mai, nō reira, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Nō reira tēnei pito he tūake nei nō nai tūhoi. E nai nei he noho I o tu puti he konei ki te ako wenei nā whānau he konei me nā iwi. Ko te waka nei I runga iau ko mata atua. E huri no tēnei toku wairua I runga maunga pohutu. I reira ke toku kuia he awhina iau he tamauti haututu ka hine pū kohurangi. Nō reira ko tēnei he tamauti o te kohu. Nō reira mihi koe nā iahau. Nō reira kia ora nā koutou I te whānau.
Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, karaka mai. Ko Tracy Pōtiki tako ingoa. Ko Auraki te Mauka, ko Waitaki te awa, ko Kaitahu Kāti Māmoe mea Waitaha oku iwi, ko Kāti Irikihu mea Mahaki kahapu, ko Tuari Pōtiki taku ho rangatira, ko a perira rātou ko merimo ana ko Tauka aku tamariki, no te wai painamua hau. Kia ora koutou. Great that you could join us. I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, I hail from the south and married a southern boy. Yep, and we have always lived, pretty much have always lived on this land, on the whenua of Kaitahu Whānui. Yeah, I work for Te Ora, an amazing organisation, and our focus is on workforce development and Māori health and wellbeing. So, yeah, nō reira, tēnā rā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa, kia ora. Oh, kia ora anō. So, just want to offer a little bit about how today will roll, or how we hope today will roll. Yeah, so we're going to cover a few things, and you know we can only do that lightly because of the time restraints, and you know we're really aware that that some of what we're covering are quite big bodies of knowledge that are connected to lots of other things, but we will attempt. We will attempt. So today we're going to talk a little bit about whare tukutuku, which is whānau supporting whānau. We're going to just provide a bit of a context for what we hope to share with you, and then talk about what is Mana Ake, and then a little bit about mana or mana ki mana, and the approaches of he Mana Ake. Tuck's going to thrill us with a conversation about tikanga, matakite, and whakawātea. So yeah, and then we'll finish off. So that's sort of a bit of an overview of what we hope to cover. And yeah, again, welcome. And I'll just hand it over to our friend here, who will run us through some housekeeping.
As Tracy, this is our second presentation. So like all things, we learn all the time. And we're hoping that this second one will be a lot better than our first one. Our first one was okay, but we're improving and we're fine-tuning things all the time. So one of the things about, and we're going to encourage you, is to feel free to message now. A lot of you are already messaging, saying hello to each other, but feel free to chat. But also throw some questions if you feel that there are some questions that you want us to clarify or endorse, or you just want to give the thumbs up, or whatever way you want to interact. Just flick over through the chat, and we've got a couple of excellent people here that are keeping an eye on that.
Yep.
This webinar is going to be recorded. So if you're taking notes, that's fine. If you forget something, we're going to put the recording together, and this will then be sent to you. But also too, it's to enable those that haven't attended. You'll be able to share this with them as well. Like I said, there are some questions you may have, but just keep flicking them through on the chat. If there's any problems, you see a number there. That's Sam, our tech guy. He's onto it.
Yay!
027 97 54052. And there is going to be a short evaluation survey, which will pop up when we end the webinar, but we'll also send out to you through email just some questions and just your thoughts on the webinar itself.
So, kia ora koutou anō. What is whare tukutuku? So, whare tukutuku is whānau supporting whānau, a workforce development approach. We're about embedding practices by Māori for Māori, integrating and privileging Māori cultural processes, and reducing alcohol and other drug harms. With compassion and reciprocity, whare tukutuku aspires to weave wellness into the social fabric within our hapori. Whare tukutuku understands that within the whakapapa of our communities is incredible potential and the ability to create a new workforce. So whare tukutuku wants to elevate an alcohol and other drug workforce that is whānau-centred and community-focused. It's redesigned for new scopes of practice, culturally capable and willing to innovate to improve Māori health outcomes. Our mission is to support whānau who mahi in the AOG system that puts whānau at the centre to improve quality of care. We encourage pou whānau to be a part of a workforce that is centred and connected to other whānau within their rohi. Whare tukutuku appreciate the absolute importance of whānau working with their hapori, acknowledging their mana, their rangatiratanga, and their connection to place. Our people, our communities, our approach. Our mahi is guided by the wider Tuarua leadership team, and we're also guided by the wisdom of a rōpū whakahaere. The chair of the rōpū is Tuari Pōtiki, also is Dr. Vicky McFarlane, Dr. Rawari Jensen, Selena Elkington, and Gilbert Taurua. They provide us with some clear direction on where we're going. So within whare tukutuku, like all things, there are to hold up the whare, we need some pou. So within there we have an area on rangatiratanga, and basically it's a focus on how we understand rangatiratanga. We strongly advocate the kōrero for systematic change. We want the kind of change that leads to inclusivity and better outcomes. We are not afraid to have brave conversations that inform and challenge the status quo. One of our objectives is to improve understanding through innovation. We also have a pou called mātauranga. So Mātauranga is about, for us in our context, is about learning and building on existing knowledge, creating opportunities to learn. We understand the importance of continuous learning, and we understand that it needs to meet the needs of our whānau and that they need to be a part of that conversation. We, also within whare tukutuku is wānanga, or wānaka we say down here. So wānaka for us is about community engagement. It's about doing things like this. It's about creating spaces where whānau can come together in a safe way to learn, and within their own takiwa or their own rohi. Say takiwa and takiwa. Oh, kia ora. Yeah. So yeah, the last part, I think, well, maybe not the last part, but another very important component of whare tukutuku is rangahau. So for us, that's about old knowledge and new knowledge and our knowledge. It's our investment in Māori understanding, Māori evidence, Māori research. So our approach is robust, it's well informed, it's culturally fit for purpose, and we're proud of what we do in that space. So that's sort of that's an overview of whare tukutuku, whānau supporting whānau, building safe whare, of which whānau are nurtured and cared for in a very, very special way. So that's our moi moia. Hand it to Tuarua. You're on, bro.
So this is where the webinar gets exciting. Tracy and I have agreed that she will throw some partais at me. The base of this webinar, a lot of it is coming from some rangahau that I'm doing, which is the integration of mātauranga Māori into clinical practices. Hence, you'll see the flow of that coming through. But Tracy will throw some curlies at me just to make sure that some of the research that I'm doing on this and probably provide some clarity. So if you see that dynamic happening, it's all scripted. So let's start with it. Like to put out there to everyone that Indigenous knowledge has value. Indigenous knowledge has worth, and most importantly, Indigenous knowledge can provide answers and offer solutions to contemporary problems.
Kia ora.
Every culture has its own stories of its origins and beginnings. It's from these stories that culture defines themselves, who they are, where they come from, their values and their beliefs. From these stories or bodies of knowledge can be interpreted as ngā tāwhito kōrero, the ancient stories. Something I was raised living on the papakainga and raised on the marae and living in Naituhoi, Te Tiko Ngātiawa, in those particular areas. These stories act as guidelines for us as future generations, explaining to us the relationship between traditional beliefs and principles of life and the important lessons learned during the process. This body of knowledge can be referred as mātauranga Māori, or Māori knowledge. And the practices are rituals that underpin this knowledge can be referred as tikanga, or Māori customs and practices. The word mātou means to know, and ranga means to weave. So together, the word is to weave knowledge. And hopefully in this webinar, we are able to do that, but we're encouraging you to also weave your knowledge as well.
Ka pai.
So our lifestyles and our environments have changed a lot, alongside the way that we do things, to adjust to the demands of change. And what is clear is that the principles live forever or live on in the changing world that remains. When we look at our history, we often see the stories of migration and the implementation of mātauranga tikanga. And that allows us to be able to see that tikanga changes, our environment changes, but what remains forever is the values underpin the way that community lives well. I just want to put a little bit of a disclaimer in here. This whānau uses Māori concepts to describe an engagement process between you, the listener, the helper in your mahi, and whānau who come to you for help. There are variations from different iwis, hapu, whānau, and hapauri, and that's something that we want to embed. This presentation is just one of the variations and should not be taken as gospel.
It's your gospel, our gospel.
Yeah. I can remember growing up at home and being told to hoi hoi all the time. However, Mana Ake will attempt to encourage us, yourselves, to take key elements and then design them into your own knowledge base, to find your voice. One important thing to remember in these concepts should not be viewed in isolation, as they are all intertwined and interlinked with each other. Here's a little wero that I found, and it's something that I always use when doing research, but it's also applicable for us as practitioners and those that lead organizations. And this wero goes something, and it comes from a whanaunga, a smith. Researchers are in receipt of privileged information.
Aye.
They have the power to distort, to make invisible, to overlook, to exaggerate, and to draw conclusions based not on factual data, but on assumptions, hidden value judgments, and often downright misunderstanding. They have the potential to extend knowledge and perpetrate ignorance. I guess what we're saying here is that even in practice, our knowledge is only one element of what takes us into the industry. How we handle knowledge is probably the key fundamentals, and that's what we're endeavoring to do in this wānanga. So what we're going to be looking at is there are 4 primary areas that explain substance use behaviour. The first one is wairuatanga.
Right.
Now, most of us know in Te Ao Māori, wai, water, rua is two. Important for us to know that 2 waters coincide with each other. So in this wānanga, what we're wanting to do is just to make sure that we're very clear that in our practices, we're operating in a way that we're flowing in 2 waters. A good example would be a lot of people come to us unwell. At the same time, they are well. And so our old ancestors would always use that reference as a way of describing where people are at. We're also aware too that sometimes some of wairuatanga, and what we're referencing here is that wairuatanga is not only limited to us in Te Ao Māori, but in Christianity, religion, but also in different cultures. So they all have their wairuatanga, their spirituality that underpins the philosophy that drives them. We're also aware too is that sometimes some of those wairuatanga can be so tapu and so overbearing and overwhelming that some people actually then become distressed. And so part of our role is to ensure that in Te Ao Wairua is that we're able to then think about the two waters, what we see and how we can bring in healing. Our other one is kai tuku, haumanu hinenaro. These are the ones that specialize primarily around trauma. And they always work with, sometimes history is driving some of the behaviors of people that present today. Pūtaio or Pauri, these are the ones that specializes in environmental situations, especially around gang culture, communities and things like that, the social dynamics. And the kai matai wairoro, these are the tohunas that look after the tinana. Their specialty in this particular case is the brain. And so those are the four primary areas, but when you look and we go through this presentation, you'll see that there's a particular focus we're going to focus in this webinar. So what is Mana Ake? He Mana Ake is a mātauranga Māori approach for ngā kaimahi Māori who want to develop their knowledge and skills when working with pou whānau. Tracy and I have come to the conclusion that somewhere along the line we've got to think about the terminologies that we use, especially making references to certain names. So you'll hear us talking a lot about pou whānau. Pou whānau is the people that come and see us. So basically, Mana Ake is a process that enables us to work with pou whānau, their whānau, particularly with mild to moderate substance use, but it's not limited to, because most of, and I make an assumption here that most of the people on this webinar come from a range of practice, from mild, moderate and severe, primary care to tertiary care, and even at the high end.
And whānau, and just whānau.
And whānau. That's the thought. He Mana Ake, like other treatment option, aims to whakamana, whakamana the wellness of ngā pou whānau and their whānau, while also strengthening the capabilities of ngā kaimahi Māori and those that are listening this morning. Early preventative strategies, including engagement and motivation, are critical for ngā tāngata and whānau who are experiencing alcohol use. But in this presentation, He Mana Ake means to have potential. And the context is working with ngā whānau through a te ao Māori or te ao mātauranga lens. The overarching theme, and it would be fitting for kaimahi to, as they're working through the empowerment within themselves, the potential within themselves, is mana kia mana, which means to then act and provide and extend the mana to others, especially our whānau. So if we're thinking about working with whānau in a Māori way, it's to extend mana to others, especially if we know what mana is for ourselves. What we're endeavouring to do is to ensure that kaimahi find their voice, that's the Mana Ake, and provide the tools for others to find their voice. That is the ma'ana kia mana. Mana ki te tāngata, that's the qualities within, and an understanding of mātauranga Māori principles is what is expected in this webinar. Now, we did have a slide that we were going to do, but we actually agreed that we're not going to do it.
We dumped it.
A little bit technical, and this is to do with the human brain, but we figured that most of the participants here already know that it's an assumption. So we're going to move into the pose. We deliberately for this one, have chosen 3 particular posts or 3 particular concepts. It's critical to remember that these definitions are just simply guidelines and may differ from one iwi to the next. So one thing to keep in mind is that these concepts should not be regarded in isolation, as they are intertwined and linked.
Yep.
And in this presentation, we will be applying culture as the concept for discussion, and then we will be using general descriptions of Māori principles and beliefs before looking into severe definitions or several definitions of tikanga. So these principles and concepts are the essentials to tikanga. Although they support the best and the most suitable behaviour for a given situation, and they are still relevant and valuable today. So despite having been practiced before colonisation, so we can see that the principles that were applied in ancient times can now be flown into our contemporary times. So considering whether these ideas have any application in your life, and I guess this is a bit of a whittle or work as you read through them, do you share the same set of values? If not, what do you do differently? What we will do is we're going to provide you with all the notes that I'm reading to you and providing to you. So they'll be offered to you once the PowerPoints and we've got ourselves together.
The theory is that we will get ourselves together.
Second wā, I think we're getting better.
Right.
Okay. How's things going? Tracy, you got any curlies there at the moment?
Yeah, I'm collecting them. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions, and really encourage our audience, our participants out there, if something springs to mind or something wells up within as Tuarua is talking, please jot it down, and then you might ask a question of him or of me as we move closer to the end. Yeah, you're doing good,
yeah.
Tuck.
We most practitioners, and I still do it when working with someone, I still tell them that I'm just as terrified.
Hi.
So we're moving into tikanga. Tikanga means the correct procedure. Notice the key word is procedure. Or to do what is right. The practice is based on Māori values for a particular situation. Obviously, we want to distinguish the difference between law and law. L-O-R-E and L-A-W. In most cases, tikanga is instilled with the L-O-R-E in mind, not the L-A-W. They have different, basically, outcomes, look the same, but motivated by different motivational ideology. So I'm just going to have a drink.
Yeah, have a wave. And just while we're on that, it's an opportunity to just stop and go, so what is the tikanga of the organisation I mahi with? What is the tikanga of the whānau who are coming to me or who I am connecting with in terms of who are looking for care around their alcohol and other drug use? So just think about those things, and I'm sure you do. I'm sure many of you do.
So therefore, tikanga has specific concerns in the best interest of community safety and wellness. That's the purpose behind tikanga. Alongside pono, which means for the right reasons, and aroha, which is the mannerism in which we apply what we do or what to do right. So that's the tikanga part. So those three have to work together. Quite often we separate them, but we don't join them together. So if we're going to look at something, we have to do what is right. The second thing we have to do is to make sure that what we're doing is for the right purpose. The third one is make sure we do it with the right attitude. And when we look at our practices, we see that people come in and they come in for whatever reasons, and we're trying to develop a purpose. We're trying to look at what we need to do, and we're trying to look at how we're going to do it, because we're governed by so many laws and regulations and restrictions. But in the heart of it, we want to make sure that we're doing it with compassion. We're doing it with the right mannerism.
We're exercising tika, pono, outcome, aroha.
Now, I found a little something that I want to throw up here to everybody, and then we're going to have a look a little bit at tikanga, but I'm going to throw this up, and if you can have a good listen, you'll see something slightly different. So the topic of tikanga Māori is the source of contention. What we're saying is that there's a number of arguments around tikanga depending on what iwi you come from. Now, the argument is not necessarily saying so-and-so is wrong. What it is saying is that there are different interpretations of tikanga. And that's an important thing, because what Tracy and I are starting to encourage is that whichever organization you belong to, it's important to know that if it's going to come from a Te Ao Māori worldview, is to make sure where you're at, especially within the geographical area of which iwi, which hapu that you're located in. So here's a little bit of a twist for you. So within the term tikanga Māori, there is from one iwi or some iwis that say that mātauranga Māori, which is the body of knowledge and beliefs within a particular tikanga. In other words, a mātauranga describes and drives a tikanga. Other iwis would say that it's the other way around. Now that's something for you to think about, eh? The second description is normally doesn't apply a mātauranga worldview to it. It applies just a protocols, which then follows through. The result is a tikanga. So these are two views in Te Ao Aotearoa, especially from different iwis, around how they interpret tikanga. So if you want to throw some questions up, we can try to clarify that a little bit more. Now, most do agree that both are agreeable. In general terms, tikanga Māori encompass both these features. However, some process or procedure may refer to as a kawa. When we look at a marae, the maraes would say that the kawa is the procedure, whereas some iwi would say is the tikanga is the procedure. So somewhere in there, we've got to define and work within our geographical areas and then look at the terminologies that are used by different iwi and hapu.
Basically, kōrero with the local hapu, with mana whenua. Yeah.
Critical, that one. I mean, I think we're starting to realise most of the wānangas we go to, some of the national groups that we belong to, often what they're putting out there, especially for mainstream services, if you're installing mātauranga Māori into your service, be assured that you're consulting, you're getting advice from your local area, but you're also placing a kai chakitanga in there, somebody to take care of that particular part of the program, especially that has Te Ao Māori, a mātauranga view.
And that's someone who is supported by the locals, by mana whenua and by the local hapu. So I think that's a really important, I can see that as being an absolute going forward when we're thinking about service design. And I would go so far as to say that whānau, hapu and iwi are needing to invest in their own institutions. And what that means is that we're not consulted. We're no longer being consulted with, we lead. we lead those organisations.
Yeah, so
Is
that's
that controversy.
I think, yeah, it's a nice way of saying kaupapa Māori service are pretty well knowledgeable around these procedures. They're always respectful of the iwi hapu, the geographical areas. Mainstream services are doing, they're leading towards that ability to hand, that particular component of program or service delivery to someone that has the capabilities to look after the wellness of the Māori that are coming into their services, but they are applying a mātauranga Māori approach to their service. So what we're saying there is, to have best practice in working with Māori is to ensure that those are instilled within organisations. It might take a while, it might take money, means that someone might have a new position. And
it will take, absolutely, good negotiation and your ability to share.
So what I want to do now is give you a little bit of a glimpse of moving, using mātauranga Māori, and then what does tikanga look like when you do that. So let's think about, first of all, the pūrākau of rangi and papa. Most of our tikanga can be traced back to these particular mātauranga or these pūrākaus or these stories. According to Te Rangi Kāheke, when he talked about the tradition, the children of rangi and papa abided within the parents who embraced in the world of darkness. You've got to think a little bit about what does that mean when somebody comes to you. So you're using a mātauranga ideology and you're thinking about someone that's coming to you, being in a world of darkness. The story suggests that the children desired both night and day. You've got to think a little bit what that means. So they argued for a long time on what was the best course of action. What they were arguing around, what was the process of the tikanga that they were going to instill, because the cause was to think about death or separation. And then they had to then look at what is the tikanga to apply to the decision. Should they kill their parents? With many debates, there were disagreements, including walkouts and retaliations, evidence with the reactions of Tawhiti Mātea. Once the children had made their decisions, mana was then activated. What that tells us that once a decision was made and a tikanga in place, then mana is activated. There's a whole process going on just there. Now, some of the iwi suggest that because part of the decision was how was mana activated? Who was going to take the task? Some iwi believe that there's a tuakana taina situation. The elder takes responsibility, so the mana is given to them. So the task was then given to Tāne. Well, Whiro, there was a bit of an argument among some iwi that they believe that Whiro may have been the older brother. So that we have to try and understand a little bit about why was the decision given to Tāne. Maybe the attributes and the characteristics of both was where the mana applied, who had the better characteristics to fulfill the task. So those are some of the things that you look for when you're working with people.
And too, Tuck, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is where the whole kōrero around mana and it not being in isolation is important, because this is a mana atua kōrero. What I love about it is that the nuance for kaitahu or naitahu is that our story talks about Papa Tuanuku and Tangaroa. And Tangaroa being her first husband. So I think that the atua kōrero, which is lovely, and how we build them into a learning environment, but to a sort of a a collaborative relationship with mana whenua and whānau who are seeking
Yeah.
care.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting, eh? So we have a mātauranga approach to a tikanga, how you implement using pūrākau, or just develop protocols and procedures without a story, and that creates a tikanga. So the choice, so you see that in the Te Awaroa, the different iwis uses the different approaches. We're not going to say who's right or wrong, we're just putting it out there. Yeah.
Totally.
Okay, so so this debate's probably going to live on for on and on and on.
Good, it's about creation,
yeah.
So that's good.
We know that tikanga evolves and changes, but here's an interesting thing that was discovered by some of the writers, and this is to do with Tāne. Once Tāne was given the role to separate his parents, there's a little bit of an article says that once he had completed, there was a ritual, a ceremonial ritual of kawa. Now remember we said earlier that kawa for some iwi was the procedures, and some believe that it was the actual tikanga or the reason. But in this particular article, it says that kawa was then used to remove the tapu from Tāne. So think about that in your mahi, that people do come into institutions with some form of tikanga. And part of your mahi is to unpack that and to provide them new tikanga, new kawa, and those kawas are the new procedures that will help develop that person into a new way of thinking.
And too, not all the time new. Sometimes it's just about going back to foundation stuff. It's already there. It's actually already there. So,
yeah. So you're right too, because it could be about going back.
Yeah.
To come to the future.
To bring it forward.
Yeah. Okay. Matakite. I always thought this was a scary word when I was growing up, but realised that most people in our sector and within the industry have matakite, but within the context of their own identity and culture and ethnicity. In this case, matakite or other names is matatuhi or titiro mate or mata aitua. Now, I'll come to that one soon because I will explain why that one is important, but as I go through, be able to explain that a bit more. So most of that is defined in various ways, but it's always with the assumption that it's an experience of perception. That's an important key word for us, eh? An experience of perception. Because times have changed, the way that the tohunas operated then was slightly different to how we operate now. Contemporary tohunas would tell us that they don't take on some of the activities that happened in traditional times because times have changed, but it's what the contemporary issues that are occurring right now that they didn't start to apply their practice. It's also defined as a seer or foresee events, visionary. I like Ryan 1997. He refers this to having second sight or intuitiveness. I think that's a key word for us, is to be intuitive in terms of our mahi.
To move beyond the common senses.
Yeah, to move beyond the common senses, To go beyond the natural senses.
The natural.
Yeah. To see naturally, to taste, to smell, to hear. That's why I got glasses and things like that. Yeah. But intuitiveness, and we'll get a little bit into that pretty soon. So I want to go back to the matatuhi. These were ones in traditional times, And even today, there are some contemporary tohunas that perceive the spirits of deceased people. Now, I don't want to sound too fluffy around that or try to, conjure up some concept here, but in terms of our addiction, what I want to do is trying to pull this into how we as practitioners, especially in the addiction sector. So let's just take the concept of the deceased person. Now, this aspect of matakite is not, and basically I'm just trying to put a little bit of waiver to protect myself, just in case some kehuas might visit me.
You had your kind of here, you were okay.
I always remember in Wānanga, and some of the whānau from the whare would know, we have a couple of tohunas that come in to do mahi with the men and the staff. And quite often they would use the phrase when working with whānau, especially when there's been some events that cause consequences for the whānau. And quite often when they get into a stage of the program, they'll come to a part where a person is a little bit stuck and then say to them something like, if your grandmother was here, what would she say? And so what they're doing is they're inviting them to go into a part of their wairua to then think about what their grandmother would be saying. So in some way, when we look at this particular tohuna mahi, there were those that actually had the ability to perceive deceased people. In this particular case, we saw a contemporary tohuna using the same philosophy, but doing it in the most friendly way. So it didn't quite create too much distress for the person. And so it was an interactive cultural way of working with that person using matakite. Any ideas around that, Tracy?
I was just sitting here thinking, what would my toa be saying about this right now?
Yeah.
That's where it took me straight away. Yeah. And I think that's why it matters. So when we're thinking about our tupuna, and we're thinking about the role that they've had and their history and how that history has impacted on who we are. I think it's important to understand it if we're trying to awhi and care for others.
Yeah, that's important, eh? I think here's an important concept for us. It's a statement that we use, and it's called, we are what we eat. I'm not talking, I'm not saying literally.
So I'm not McDonald's, just so you know.
We are what we eat. So obviously back in traditional times, there were wānangas that tohunas would go to, and what they will be doing is feasting on the food of the tohuna, the main tohuna who would be teaching them. And so they'll be just eating, and feasting, and then their worldview will be then determined on what it is that they're eating.
I remember Kaumātua saying to me, you see the world the way that you are, not the way that it is. Which is, these are similar sort of terms, which get you to think about what you take in and then what you do with that. And they're the things that help shape a worldview.
I was one of the things, often we talk with different tohunas, and when they talk with people underpinning the ideology is philosophy. And obviously in Te Ao Māori, we have free creation stories that some iwi adapt and some iwis disagree with. So the first one is the philosophy of Io, the supreme creator of all.
That's a good example.
And they use Io, and if you're a scholar or you're schooled under Io, you have the ability to predict and diagnose sometimes what's happening with people based on that Io philosophy. So they talk about wairua. Anything that's affecting someone, there's a contributor from wairua. However, there are other iwis that might suggest that that philosophy came from Christianity, because other iwis would say that the philosophy that underpins their ideology is rangi and papa and all the kōreros around Ngā Atua. And so when they're talking with people, they're applying all of those atua concepts within what is they're seeing within the person that's presenting and manaing them for that, rather than the reason why they come to the program.
Which I think is kind of cool, because really Tuarua has talked about a contemporary tuhonga and a contemporary context of how we live and how we are able to rethink and reimagine what our tupuna were trying to tell us. And I think that that's a really interesting example. And even if I think about you can't do any of this work without having a foundational understanding of tiriti o Waitangi, pre-treaty, and the process of colonisation. The process of colonisation is what has shaped and formed who we are and how we are today. And I think that regardless of, no matter what we do and how we look at it, the impact of that is long-reaching and ongoing. And you mentioned some saying, some hapu iwi, whānau hapu iwi, talking about, iwi as being a more contemporary construct. And one of the things which we have observed in Ao Māori is how we have adapted these tools of colonisation, and one of those tools was religion, how we have adapted those to help us understand the world that we were living in at a particular time. And I think that that's important to acknowledge. When we're looking at, even if we look at Ringatu and Roa Kinanga, I'll just go to your rohi and talk about that. So it's important to understand that you need to have a good baseline understanding of that whole hekoi that has brought us to where we are now.
So those are just good mātauranga philosophies, the way people will view the world. You, as practitioners, I'm trained in TA, therefore my worldview have a little bit of a lens of TA. So when I'm working with someone, a little bit of that lens will come through. So I'm diagnosing someone through their transaction and what they're saying. Obviously, that's not the only approach. So I guess that's what we're trying to say. It's not the only approach, but it enables us from a contemporary world that we're living in, is that matakite gives us the ability to have a look at what the belief systems and philosophies that drive us, and the ability to see the person in front of us and to predict what it is that we're seeing in the future, and what course of action would we be taking to enable that to happen, and whether they're going to continue. The good thing, and I talked about the tohuna, the one that's, there's a particular one, and let me just see if I can locate him. I forgot to mention is the Mana Ake. They were the ones that were able, they specialized in makutu. Now, in our contemporary time, what that really implies to us is that the ability to see inflections. I think that's a key thing for us, is to see that we can see cause and effect, but that doesn't drive us. It allows us to see cause and effect, but it's not the remedy or the solution, because embedded in that person is mana. Or atua, So that's the view that we're encouraging to see people as, but we still got to do the work, and that's about diagnosing and looking at what are the issues that bring this person, but that's not the focus. It helps us a little bit. Okay, we can probably move to the next one. I think I'm getting the wink to hurry up.
Oh, you're all good. Plenty of time.
So let's go into whakawātea. When I think about whakawātea, I think about the definitions. Basically, it means to clear, to free someone up, to help them move past a particular situation. Times have changed in our practices and how we do that, but essentially the principle of whakawātea still exists.
Right.
And the information we're getting now is from contemporary tohungas who tell us that there are some processes that we can still apply in our treatment, but also it's to basically help people transition within the transformational situation. But it doesn't mean all problems are solved. It just means for that particular time.
It's a means of protection as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's a definition that a contemporary tohunga said to me that what whakawātea means to them. Basically, it's sweeping a dirty floor. Well, I got that straight away, what that means straight away. I can imagine in your practice, that would be something that I would be conjuring in my mind, is that I've got a broom and I have to sweep this floor. The problem is, where am I going to sweep the paru to? So this tohunga had suggested that if we take that concept, then all the work that people do from the time they enter into a service or they come to someone, there's a whole lot of therapeutic processes, there's a whole lot of mana enhancing. We're having a bit of laugh, this mana enhancing terminology.
We're unpicking it.
Yeah. So diagnosing why people come in, but the mana enhancing processes through the whole process and time that they're with practitioners is a whakawātea. It's a process that continues on until the person comes to an agreement within themselves that it's time to move on. So I'm gonna just talk a little bit about, we talked earlier about kawa, which is the ceremonial process to remove tapu. Basically, that's what you're doing. You're removing those restrictions that bring someone into a service. And you're instilling new protocols, or you're instilling the tika processes to help them live well. Now, often in a lot of programs that happens, but the maintenance part of it can be quite stressing for the person, because it's about living life every day. So they're always worried about the health. The aim is to get people into noa. Noa me ora, the ability to have autonomy, the place where they can then sit in the place and say, and a good example would be is in a lot of work really around restorational work, especially around domestic violence. Quite often, there's someone that's been affected by violence and someone that uses violence, and the stress and for the person that has been affected by violence puts them in also a traumatic state. And so there's working with both. The whakawātea is bringing that all together so that there's an agreement. Now, in most cases, people will agree that it's time to move on. You've done the right process, and they're coming in to talk about and confronting the issues. Some cases, the result of whakawātea is to separate, but co-parent the children, but to separate in agreement that it is the best course of action at that particular time. One is because they discovered the little intricacies about themselves. And so that's part of that whakawātea, is to be able to get people. Now that's that sweeping the floor bit. Any questions there, Tracy?
Well, you've got to clean your whare at the end of the day, don't you?
Yeah.
And you've got to keep that whare clean.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think whakawātea, the best example, if we're thinking about seeing it in action, is at tangi. It's the best example, and it's one of the tikanga which we've held on to very closely.
Yeah.
And I think that every step that we take in terms of tangi is a demonstration of all of those beautiful values that underpin who we are, how we are, and what we do. So it's more of a statement than a partai. I've got a few partai though.
Yeah, I often have a little bit of a chuckle, especially in wānanga and students, especially in, I won't name the program, but especially in programs where students carry a load of burden because of having to study, having to commit, having to sacrifice. So that's a form of tapu. And that tapu is helping them. So they're putting conditions within themselves to get them to the end. And sometimes the whakawātea process in the most practical way is when they get to the ceremony, where all of the the lecturers and all of that are come together and they've endorsed them and they've given them the final go-ahead. And so they're standing on the stage and they're cleaning and say, it's finished, it's done. And they're noa. They're in a state of noa. So that's a practical way of thinking about it. In a clinical and treatment way, there are processes, but thinking about taking people to a place where they can have autonomy. So what we'll do now is we'll just go through, I'm just thinking it's 6 past, so yeah. I got the hurry up before, now I've got the fingers up, we're on time. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just give you a little bit of, and it's not the only way, so we're going to look at some principles of whakawātea. Okay. You want to, okay, so the first one, and the reason why we're putting this one here on is because we're trying to combine traditional and contemporary. Eh? So the first one is karakia. Traditional times, the tohungas would always go to karakia because they want to connect with atua to help them through the process of whakawātea. In our contemporary time, the tohunas are saying to us that not many of us are inclined in the old religion way, but what we do have is the ability to ground ourselves. So it's basically karakia is to set the scene. But it's also recognizing that sometimes po whānau and their whānau may have a different way of coming into a setting. The second one, and the most important one for all of us, is Kyoto. This particular principle refers to making sure you've got your act together. You know who you are. Often complaints made against a practitioner is based on the fact is that the practitioner has the inability to moderate themselves when confronted with a difficult situation. And in that particular case, Kyoto means to be able to moderate yourself, because some of the stuff that comes up, and we all know this, can be quite distressing, disturbing. And so we've got to have all of those mechanisms in place to ensure that we're kato. Emotionally stable, non-reactive, but still stay within the context of a person that's come in. The third principle is kia tau te Māori. This is the ability for the practitioner, the kaimahi, to be able to create space, because often people come into that space anxious, overwhelmed, apprehensive, all of the things that is human. And so part of the facilitation is to ensure that they're reading all of those things. So they got themselves sorted, but they're also reading the atmosphere, the environment. They're not necessarily taking all the information that someone in the office said this person has got this particular problem. What they're actually doing is that they're taking care of the mauri that's just emerged as someone steps into that room and that environment.
And I think too, it's a real gift to be able to do that. It requires you to be able to sit still
Yep.
in a very soft way.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we've all met, and I know I've got people in my whānau, they just bowl into places. They're completely oblivious to all of the things that are happening in that space when they bowl in there. So it's the opposite of that, eh?
I think it's critical for us, and often as a supervisor, often you know, supervisees are just as human as everybody else, you know, and so we have to ensure that they get channeled to the right places to, you know, to work on those things, but also have a philosophical base around, you know, what is Māori? We all know in contemporary language that means the atmosphere, but in Te Ao Māori it conjures up all of the philosophies that someone has, and what they're trying to do is take care of that. The fourth one is atahaere. Atahaere, the word ata with we haven't got the macaron on top. We'll put the macaron on top once we, I just noticed it. It changes the dynamic of the word. Without the macaron, it just means morning. Atahaere, or I mean atamaria, but atahaere with the macaron just means to take care, to slow down. So make sure that the process of engagement is not driven by, you know, ideas and
45 minutes.
And 45 minutes, hours and things like that. What this is implying is that we have to give space for the person and that it's led by them. Quite often we can get into situations where if it's gauged by us, we either want to hurry up or we've got ideas what's going on. And quite often, you know, some of the cases that that I see is that sometimes the complaint is that the practitioner is so much in the rush that they've lost the story. Okay, so this enables the person to be able to, you know, come to tell the story. Yeah? So that's what they come here, is to kōrero. The fifth is whakarongo. Whakarongo is where the kaimahi reflects and listens and hears the kōrero with no preconceived ideas, bedded in the background, hanging on the shelf is all the kōrero that was prior to this stage. But what they're beginning to see now is hear the story, hear what's going on without giving feedback, staying engaged with the person, ensuring that the person is grounded. Quite often what agitates a lot of people is when a practitioner starts to take them on the wrong journey. And so in this particular case, whakarongo means to be grounded, to reflect, to hear the kōrero and allow for the story to emerge. The sixth, I think, is awhinatana. It's the ability, once you listen, it's to have a look at what is it that you can awhi. And this one here is, we still engage with the wairua and the hinenaro. We're not talking about physical things, but in this particular situation, the awhinatana is the empathy. It's that connection with the pau whānau, which basically is allowing the trust factors to come through and emerge itself. But with empathy, it enables the person to be able to say, this person or this practitioner or this clinician or this whānau or kaimahi is actually engaging with me, is actually connected with me. And it's that point of whakawātea that we're describing here. Next one, tūpato. Tracy's favourite. Very interesting one, this one. Obviously, sometimes some kick up the guts, we would say. 6 months later, the person may turn around and say, that was the best thing that happened to me. But in that moment of time, I could have left. I could have gone somewhere. I could have, the result of it could have been devastating or disastrous for them. So in this particular situation is that tūpato means to keep the pou whānau safe. Quite often, accountability, the lines between making a person accountable and what accountability looks like, sometimes causes the pou whānau to be re-traumatized within, the trauma, the shame and the guilt that arises for them. And so somewhere near the practitioners has got to have that ability to see that, to know when you can do the wero, when you can ask those difficult, put them in that difficult situation, but also realizing that sometimes they may not be ready and it can re-traumatize the person because of shame and guilt of what they've done.
So it's ability to negotiate, balance.
Yeah. And this one is koha. It's to offer the pou whānau, things like mana, te whānau, the gems, talk about stories around, atua and things like that. These externalizes the situation, but it also enables the person to be able to see within the context of a mātauranga worldview, the ability to be able to connect.
The koha could be, the koha could be connecting with a whakapapa kaumātua of these, connecting them, reconnecting, like strengthening that koha.
Yeah, offering them something, with aroha. The kawa, we talked a little bit about the kawa, is providing strategies and put things into place to help them, give them some skills, give them tools and things like that. And the ritana is doing the contemporary rituals or something that is value to them, something that they want to finish the session with or finish their time with. So really at the end of the day, what we're saying here is that there is no limitations to whakawātea. This is just an example that might change in the time and place, because at the end of the day, the idea is to get them to noa, to give them the autonomy to make decisions. Even the ability to say to me, if I'm working with someone, kia ora, thank you very much, I'm going home now. That courageousness, that ability to do that. They also, what we're saying here is that this is not just the only agreement or the only whakawātea process. We're just encouraging you that this is a framework. You have the ability to do that because this is basic practice stuff here. What you're doing is you're providing a pathway to autonomy, to noa, and giving that person that ability to come to that place. So there's no limitations. I always think about a West Indian professor that I know. It's true, from Trinidad, Tobago. I had a visit there and sat with him for a little while. And quite often he'll talk about these issues and then he'll just turn around and go, suffer well. So, no reira whānau, koe nā kōrero o tātou i tā rānei, no reira ko hau e tukuna te wā ki wetahi e hihi i te kōrero mai.
We have a few questions. Okay, so before we jump into some reflections, there's a couple of pātai. So John mentioned that starting and finishing with karakia works well for what he called, you said whaiora, so ka pai, tika tō kōrero. If that's what works well with the whānau you're with, then absolutely, because at the end of the day, it's about doing what's best for the person you are working with or sitting with. So ka pai, John. Rose mentioned that what if someone doesn't believe in karakia? And I think this is a really good question. So taku whakaro, I am responsible for my own competence about how I engage with whānau. Yeah. Cultural safety is how the whānau who are coming to me for care experience that care. If they are really uncomfortable with karakia, then the karakia is for me, not for them, until they're ready, and they may never be ready. So what I'm saying is it's perfectly fine that when we're working with whānau that who are on their own journey, that it is their journey, and it's not up to us to impose on their journey. It's about sitting alongside in the way that Tuarua has described to get to a place of noa. So.
Yeah. You can change the word karakia to something that may be more appropriate. Maybe whakamoemiti, something that just basically sets the scene. What you're doing is you're engaging and you're allowing the environment to settle, and you're wanting to blend in with the person. So karakia is a terminology, and sometimes even that's debatable about what it means.
Aye.
Yeah. And so it is how you set the scene. The reference we made here can be changed. We're evolving, so that might change. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's a really, it's something which I've thought about a lot, and it's something which I've had to experience firsthand working with whānau. Why do we, and the question really is, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and why are we doing it in this way? So they're the sorts of things we have to ask ourselves when we're on a journey with whānau. There was another part I hear, Tuck. Me pihia te whakawātea I a koe I te whakamutinga o te mahi.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know who asked that one. Peter.
Yeah, quite often gauging from different environments. If you whakawātea in Te Ao Māori with Māori whānau, they like what was mentioned earlier, they love to finish with a karakia ceremonial process, which is just a way for them to settle. Being mindful that the whakawātea process is, to help them, through a journey. So it's the transitional process. And so the rituals you can apply, but be mindful as well too that for some whānau, I've discovered now that there are some Māori atheists around.
Absolutely.
And so I've got to be careful with that. So the whakamutina is whatever process that you discover in that moment of time when trying to, close the session. I can give two examples with two cases that I was involved with. One of the whānau wanted the mutina like a karakia, and then the embracement. And others just wanted to just sit, just sit there for a moment of time, and they would just, what they do, the mindfulness for themselves. There's no one way. I think the purpose of this wānanga or this webinar is to just provoke some thought and idea and discover for yourself what is the best way.
Absolutely.
We're learning all the time. In the old days, if we use the old traditional whakawātea here in Kyoto, when they had wānanga and they had to test the students, they throw them in the sea with the sharks. So whoever came out was wātea. Interesting philosophy from Kaitahu here. Another one from here is when they were testing some of the, the potential tohunga that were coming through. Some of the testing was, the tohunga ahure he would do a tutai in a cabbage leaf and then provide it to the students and say, eat, and then find out which one would eat it. It's something we won't do now, but imagine in traditional time, what was the philosophy and the concept behind that particular ceremony, whakamutu, for the students? Yeah, I think
there's a degree of adaptation which needs to occur, and I was just thinking about something Parairi used to do, and a type of karakia, but not explicitly karakia, but it is a type of karakia, because it is about gratitude and thanks. And he would say, what is one thing, take a moment, what is one thing that you are thankful for today? And what is one thing that you are grateful for today? And then there would just be quiet. Absolutely a karakia in a different way. So even though, you know, a lot of, I know a lot of my whānau, for instance, have issues with religion and religionists, and rightfully so. And we have to respect that. We have to respect all of what our whānau bring to the table. And I think that's what's really important, hey?
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Yeah. How you whakamutu ko kōtou ki tēnā? Yeah, just some of those complex, old traditional ways. Yeah, I'm glad we moved on, but certainly I know what the idea was and the concept behind it, all the philosophy behind it. Yeah.
I think we could offer a little bit of I've got something I'd like to conclude with. Is there anything you want to say before we do that? So just thinking about how's our time? Yeah, so I've got two lines of thoughts going on. So I'm thinking about practice and why we do what we do. And I'm going to make a couple of statements about that. So in my mind, getting the best outcomes for whānau is about doing what's best for the person or the people you're working with. It needs to be grounded in your ability to communicate what has meaning and purpose throughout the engagement. It will require a commitment to the relationship, tolerance, skills, and an open mind, and a firm grounding in who you are and what you know. So well-being from addiction or from alcohol and other drugs for Māori is entrenched in cultural interventions which address well-being as a whole in a holistic way. The key to understanding the benefit of culturally focused care is recognising what gives purpose and value to the relationship, and the ability of helpers, that's us helpers, to engage with the person and their whānau in the most meaningful, safe way possible. That's sort of how I'd like to sort of finish that part before I give it to
the evaluation.
Rangatira. Oh, just a reminder that an evaluation will pop up, and you will, anyone who's signed into the webinar will receive an email with a what do you call those things you click on? A link for the survey. So yeah, just a big shout out for everyone who joined us today. It's been an absolute honour and privilege to share time with you and to listen to the words of this very wise tūhoi fella sitting next to me. So nā mihi kia koutou, kia koe, taka, kia ora.
Yeah, kia koe. Nō reira noho mai a koutou, haere koutou ki tō kāinga, i nā kore a Tracy, awhi mai nā whānau i reira kia. Nō reira, i runa i a koutou te arohatana, ko nā tua, nā tipuna, rātou ke i runa i a koutou. Nō reira, mauri ora i a koutou.
Take care, guys. Take care.